The first sound was a wet, percussive crack, like a branch snapping under the weight of ice. The second was the delicate shattering of the wine glass against the slate floor. But the sound that echoed in the cavern of my skull, the one that broke something far deeper than bone, was the soft, almost bored sigh from my son Julian as he watched his wife, Genevieve, pull her arm back from the blow. He didn't flinch. He didn't rush forward. He simply took a slow, deliberate sip from his own glass, his eyes holding mine as I crumpled, a puppet whose strings had been severed. I landed hard on the gleaming, sterile kitchen tiles, my shoulder absorbing the impact with a jolt that radiated up my neck. The world swam in a nauseating blur of expensive cabinetry and stainless steel appliances. I tasted blood, a hot metallic tang that mingled with the lingering sweetness of the Chardonnay she had used to shatter my face. Pain, white-hot and blinding, lanced through the left side of my jaw, but it was a distant signal, a distress call from a body I no longer felt connected to. What held me captive was the chilling stillness of the scene, the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of roasted rosemary from the dinner I had prepared, the sight of Julian's polished leather shoes just inches from my face. They didn't move. Now, Genevieve's voice was a silken thread of venom, slicing through the ringing in my ears. Perhaps you'll learn to stay in your place. And Julian, my boy, the child I had rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers, let out a dry, humorless chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of malice, but of something far worse. Indifference. "You've made a mess, Jen," he murmured, his gaze flicking not to me, but to the ruby-red splash of wine against a newly painted gray wall. My blood was beginning to pool on their floor, a darker, thicker stain, but their concern was reserved for the decor. I tried to push myself up, but my arms trembled, useless. Time seemed to stretch and warp. I could hear my granddaughter, Clara, calling my name from the top of the stairs, her voice small and trembling. "Grandma?" Genevieve's response was immediate and sharp as glass. "Clara, go to your room, now." A flurry of small footsteps, a door slamming shut with a finality that felt like a tomb ceiling. I was alone with them. Genevieve stepped over my body with the careless grace of someone navigating a puddle. She retrieved a cloth from the sink, not for my bleeding face, but for the wine staining the cabinet. She knelt, her movements precise and efficient, wiping away the spill. Then she turned her head, her perfectly sculpted face a mask of cold contempt, and looked directly into my eyes. "You bring this on yourself, Elara. You always do." I tried to form a word, a plea, a curse, but my mouth was a ruin. A shard of something, tooth or bone, scraped against my tongue. Breathing was an agony. Julian finally moved, but not toward me. He crouched beside his wife, pressing a kiss to her temple, his voice a low whisper I couldn't decipher. She smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile that didn't reach her glacial blue eyes. It was then, over her shoulder, that I saw it. On the granite countertop, illuminated by the cold, recessed lighting, sat a thick manila envelope. My name, Elara Vance, was written on the tab, but the handwriting, a shaky, looping script, wasn't mine. My hands, riddled with the arthritis of 70 years, hadn't been steady enough for that kind of signature in a decade. They had forged it. Or they had tricked me, pushing papers in front of me in the hazy aftermath of my recent heart surgery, banking on my medicated confusion. The realization hit me with a force greater than the bottle. They believed it was finished. They were so confident in their victory that they could commit this violence, this final act of erasure, and then calmly discuss who would call the realtor first. They left me there, a discarded object on the floor of the house I had built, and returned to their dinner. The clinking of their silverware was the soundtrack to my breaking heart. Somehow, I found the strength to crawl. I dragged myself across the cold slate, one arm pulling my weight, the other cupped protectively over my shattered jaw. In the downstairs bathroom, I hauled myself up by the sink, knuckles white. I didn't dare look in the mirror. I didn't need to see the swelling, the grotesque distortion of my own face. I had been an army nurse for 30 years. I knew the geography of broken bones by feel alone. No one called an ambulance. No one offered a single piece of ice. They had calculated the damage perfectly, enough to silence me, but not enough to attract the unwanted attention of the law. They had made one critical miscalculation, however. They believed that because I had stopped raising my voice years ago, I had forgotten how to fight. They mistook my silence for surrender, but what they failed to understand is that silence is not empty. It is a vessel, and mine, after 70 years, was full to the brim. That night, locked in the sterile guest room, I pressed a bag of frozen peas to my face and listened to the house settle around me. I didn't sleep. The pain was a roaring fire, but it was the cold, clear flame of purpose that kept me awake. They had taken my silence for weakness. Tonight, they had given it a voice. At 5 a.m., when the sky was still a bruised purple, I sent a single encrypted text message. It contained only two things: a name and an address. It went to Beatrice Thorne, the only person left on this earth who knew that the quietest woman in the room was often the most observant. By sunrise, I had packed a small, worn leather bag with essentials and slipped out the back door, disappearing into the damp, misty morning of Port Blossom, Washington. If you have ever been made to feel invisible in your own life, if your voice has ever been stolen by those who claim to love you, then you need to listen closely. They didn't just break my jaw that night. They woke a part of me I thought had died with my husband. They thought they were writing my final chapter. They had no idea I was about to write a new book. The motel room on the outskirts of town smelled of stale coffee and the kind of cheap pine cleaner that never quite masks the scent of desperation. I sat on the edge of a lumpy bed, the faded floral comforter rough beneath my hands. My jaw was a universe of throbbing pain, crudely taped with gauze and medical tape I'd bought from a 24-hour gas station, my face hidden behind oversized sunglasses, even in the dim light. I had walked the 2 miles from the house, a ghost moving through the pre-dawn fog. The Gideon's Bible in the nightstand drawer remained untouched. This was not a time for prayer. It was a time for precision. My late husband Daniel's old laptop whirred to life with a reluctant groan. The screen flickered, a relic from a time before sleek, silent technology, but it worked. I navigated to a folder named Homestead Docs, a digital archive I'd always meant to organize. There it was, the deed to our house, signed 31 years ago, Elara and Daniel Vance. The property had been part of a homestead legacy grant, a local initiative to help veterans establish roots in the community. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, searching for the one clause I prayed was still there. Clause 17b. My breath caught. In the event of the primary title holder's incapacitation or death, full ownership is retained by the surviving spouse. Transfer of title requires the in-person, verified consent of said spouse, with any challenge to their mental competency requiring evaluation by no fewer than 2 state-certified physicians. That was their endgame. Not just to steal the house, but to erase me, to have me declared a fragile, confused old woman incapable of managing her own affairs. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small file of my recent medical records, the discharge papers from my heart surgery, a report from my last physical. Not a single document mentioned cognitive decline. But they were banking on the narrative, on the quiet assumption that a 70-year-old woman is inherently frail, forgettable. They weren't just trying to take my home. They were trying to take my history, my sanity, my very identity. The email I composed to Beatrice was stripped of all emotion. She didn't need the story of my pain. She needed the architecture of their crime. I attached a scan of the original deed, my driver's license, and my most recent doctor's report. The subject line was 3 words: "The clock starts now." Her reply came in under 5 minutes. "Where are you?" I sent the motel's name and my room number. Then I began the meticulous process of disentanglement. I called my credit union, my voice a strained, painful whisper, and froze every account. I changed every PIN, blocked all online access, and canceled the automatic utility transfers Julian had so helpfully set up for me because it was just easier that way, Mom. Each call was a snip of a thread, severing the financial ties they had woven around me like a spider's web. There were no tears, no flashes of rage, just the cold, steady focus of a sapper diffusing a bomb. People like Julian and Genevieve rely on emotional chaos. They expect hysterics, confusion, despair. If you panic, you've already lost. A knock on the door came just before noon. 2 sharp raps, followed by a softer one. B's signal since we were girls. I opened it to see her standing there, a force of nature crammed into a practical trench coat. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her sharp eyes magnified by her glasses. She took in my swollen, bruised face, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second. She didn't offer a word of sympathy. She didn't need to. Her expression tightened into one of cold, controlled fury. "Let's get to work," she said, striding past me and closing the door with a decisive click. She spread a printed copy of the fraudulent deed on the rickety motel table. She had already highlighted key sections. They filed a quit-claim deed, transferring the title to a shell corporation. JVG Holdings, Julian Vance, Genevieve. Clever. They found a notary in the next county, someone on their payroll, no doubt. The signature is a decent forgery, but the filing is sloppy. They submitted it electronically, without your required physical presence. If we can prove you were injured and under duress at the time of filing, the entire transfer is void. She looked up at me, her eyes like steel. But we need more than the forgery. We need proof of intent, of malice. I reached into my bag and placed a small digital voice recorder on the table between us. I had started carrying it weeks ago, a nagging premonition I couldn't shake. I pressed play. The audio was chillingly clear. Genevieve's laugh, brittle as ice. Julian's smug voice telling her the county office would process it by Monday, that the old woman would be in a nursing home by Christmas, and that Elara won't remember a damn thing anyway. Bea listened, her lips a thin, hard line. This is a start, but a jury needs to see it. Is there any kind of camera in that house they don't know about? A slow, painful smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. There is. As a digital weather station Julian gave me last Christmas, he said it would help me keep track of the storms. I paused, letting the irony hang in the air. I never figured out the app, but a little red light always blinks when it detects motion. I bet it's still recording to the cloud. Bea's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. Can you access it? Not from here, I said, my voice gaining strength. But I know someone who can. She leaned back, a general surveying a battlefield. Then that's our next move. We don't just react, Elara. We build a fortress of evidence so high they can't climb over it. This time, they don't get to write your ending. We do. I sat back, the throbbing in my jaw a dull, steady drumbeat. But beneath it, a stronger rhythm was rising in my chest. A heartbeat I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a strategist, and the war had just begun. We didn't go back to the motel. Bea insisted I stay with her, in her small, book-cluttered bungalow, hidden behind a wall of unruly lavender bushes. It was a place that felt safe, where the scent of old paper and lemon tea hung in the air. She set me up in the guest room, a quiet space with a view of a garden that had been lovingly, if chaotically, tended. Sleep, however, remained elusive. The pain was a dull ache now, a constant companion, But it was Julian's voice that kept me awake, a smug, dismissive echo in the chambers of my memory. She won't fight us. She never fights. Just after 4 a.m., I sat up in the darkness. I had found another small voice recorder in a drawer, the kind used for taking notes. I'd started leaving it on in the living room at home, a habit born of a suspicion I hadn't wanted to name. I clicked through the files, listening to hours of muffled television and ticking clocks. Then I found it, a recording from 2 nights before the attack. Genevieve's voice, sharp and impatient. "You think she'll even remember signing it?" A low chuckle from Julian. "She won't remember a thing. The medication they have her on. She's already halfway gone. Get the damn deed filed. She won't fight us. She never fights." I listened to it 3 times, the words burning themselves into my mind. They hadn't seen me as a person. They'd seen me as an obstacle, a piece of furniture to be moved. The rage I expected to feel never came. It was replaced by something colder, clearer, a profound and absolute certainty about what had to be done. At dawn, I handed the recorder to Bea as she poured coffee in the kitchen. She listened without a word, her expression unreadable until the final, damning line. Then she looked up at me, her voice devoid of all emotion. "This is the nail." We moved with grim efficiency. By 10 a.m. we were back on the road, heading toward my neighborhood. Bea had borrowed a specialized laptop and was methodically labeling digital folders: audio evidence, forged documents, legal precedent, media release. She was building a case file like a munitions expert assembling a bomb. We parked 2 houses down from mine and waited. The street was quiet under the perpetually gray Washington sky. Julian's car was gone, but Genevieve's polished black SUV sat in the driveway like a predator at rest. A few minutes past 11, the school bus rumbled to a stop at the corner. Clara stepped off, her small shoulders hunched under the weight of her pink backpack. She kept her head down as she walked, a little soldier trudging through a war zone. She didn't see me until she was almost past our car. I opened the door and stepped out, staying in the shadow of a large maple tree. She froze, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. Her hand tightened on her backpack strap. She glanced nervously back at her house, then, making a decision, she ran to me, her small arms wrapped around my waist in a desperate hug, her face buried in my coat. She didn't cry. She just held on. Bea remained in the car, a silent, watchful presence. I knelt down, ignoring the protest from my bruised ribs. "I need your help, sweetheart," I whispered. "Just one more time." She nodded, her expression serious beyond her 8 years. She reached into her backpack, fumbled inside a pencil box, and pulled out a tiny flash drive shaped like a purple cat. "I downloaded it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I put it in here, so Mom wouldn't find it." I took the drive, its plastic casing warm from her hand, and slipped it into my pocket. My heart ached with a love so fierce it was painful. This child, living in the shadow of their cruelty, had chosen bravery. I walked her to her front door. It was already ajar. She slipped inside without a backward glance. I turned and walked back to the car, my steps measured and deliberate. Bea plugged the flash drive into the laptop. A folder labeled Kitchen Cam popped up. The video file loaded. The footage was brutally clear. There I was carrying in the serving tray. There was Genevieve, rising from her chair. The swing of the bottle, the sickening impact, my collapse. I saw Julian's non-reaction, the way he calmly observed the assault on his own mother as if watching a mildly interesting television show. It was all there, documented, time-stamped, irrefutable. Bea leaned back, her arms crossed over her chest. "This is it, Ilara," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with finality. "This is everything." We spent the rest of the day in a blur of activity, making copies, uploading the evidence to secure, encrypted cloud servers, creating multiple backups. Bea contacted a trusted journalist she knew, one who ran a fiercely independent blog focused on elder abuse and housing fraud. And she scheduled a consultation with a pro bono attorney who specialized in exactly these kinds of cases. All the while I sat and watched the footage again and again, not to relive the trauma, but to sear the truth into my soul, to burn away any lingering shred of doubt or misplaced maternal affection. This was not a family dispute. This was a crime. That night, in a fresh notebook, I began to write. I listed every dismissive comment, every forgotten promise, every instance of gaslighting from the past 5 years. I listed the names of neighbors who had seen unexplained bruises, the pharmacist who had once quietly asked if I was feeling safe at home. I was no longer just reclaiming my house. I was reclaiming my history. Let them come home and find the ground had shifted beneath their feet. Let them wonder, for once, when the floor was going to fall out from under them. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope, the paper thick and ostentatious. My name was printed in a cold, gold script. It was an invitation to a dinner party at my own house. Julian and Genevieve were hosting it in my honor, a celebration of my transition into a well-deserved retirement. Bea read it, her lips curled in a humorless smile. They're trying to control the narrative. They'll paint you as the beloved matriarch, happily handing over the reins. They're building their alibi in public. I nodded. My jaw had healed into a stiff, tender knot, but my voice was back, steady and clear. It no longer trembled. We had everything we needed: the video footage, the voice recordings, the forged deed, the original grant agreement with its veteran protection clauses. Every piece of their treachery was documented, encrypted, and ready. All we needed was the right moment, and Julian, in his infinite arrogance, had just handed it to us. I didn't RSVP. On the night of the party, I simply showed up. Bea was by my side, a silent pillar of support. I wore the same simple navy dress I'd worn the day Daniel and I signed the papers for that house 31 years ago. No makeup, no jewelry, just the quiet armor of my own history. Julian opened the door, a half-empty wine glass in his hand. His practiced smile faltered for a second when he saw us. "Mom, glad you could make it." I walked past him into the living room. The house felt alien. My furniture had been rearranged into cold, minimalist vignettes. My favorite armchair was gone. The family photos that had once lined the mantelpiece had been replaced by sterile, abstract art. The guests, a mix of their new friends and a few old neighbors, milled about with champagne flutes, their laughter sounding brittle and false. They greeted me with a cautious uncertainty, their eyes darting to the faint yellowing bruise still visible on my cheekbone. Genevieve, playing the perfect hostess, tapped a fork against her glass. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for a toast." We gathered in the dining room. I took a seat near the end of the table, an observer in my own home. Julian stood at the head, raising his glass. "I'd like to thank you all for coming to celebrate family and fresh starts. My mother, Elara, has been through so much, and we are just so proud to be able to care for her as she steps into a quieter, more peaceful chapter of her life." He smiled at me, a politician's smile, empty and self-congratulatory. A few people clapped politely. Then I stood up. The room fell silent. "I brought something to share as well," I said, my voice resonating in the sudden stillness. Julian's smile tightened. Genevieve's hand clenched around the stem of her glass. I walked to the large smart television mounted on the wall, took the small cat-shaped flash drive from my purse, and plugged it into the USB port. The screen flickered to life. The footage began to play. A collective sharp intake of breath filled the room. There I was, in that very kitchen. The swing of the bottle, the sickening thud of its impact, my body crumpling to the floor. Then came the audio, crystal clear in the horrified silence. Genevieve's cruel words, "She won't remember a thing." Julian's reply, "File the deed. She'll be in a nursing home by Christmas." The video paused on a freeze frame of my face, swollen and bloodied, lying on the slate tile. I turned slowly to face the stunned guests. "This," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the granite countertops behind me, "is the peaceful chapter my son and his wife have planned for me. This is what they did in the house my husband and I built with our life's savings, a house protected by the very veterans' grants he earned with his service." Julian lunged forward, his face pale. This is out of context. She's confused. She's twisting things." Genevieve stood, trembling with rage. "She's not well. This is what we've been dealing with. She's having an episode." I looked directly at her. "My jaw wasn't broken by an episode, Genevieve." One of the neighbors, a woman I'd known for 20 years, stood up, her face a mask of disgust, and walked out. Another began whispering urgently to her husband. At that moment, B stood and began handing out slim document folders to the remaining guests. "In these packets," she announced in a calm, clear voice, "you will find a copy of the falsified deed, the relevant state housing clauses it violates, and notarized statements from several witnesses." Julian's voice rose to a shout. "This is harassment! This is slander! You have no idea what you're doing, Mother!" I walked to the front door, pausing on the threshold. I turned back to look at him, at the boy I had raised, now a stranger in a ruined kingdom of his own making. "No, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "For the first time in your life, you have absolutely no idea what I am doing." Then I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the storm to break behind me. B stayed to answer questions. I didn't need to. The evidence was speaking for itself. I had not screamed. I had not cried. I had simply held up a mirror, and now they were all forced to see the monsters reflected within it. By the time I returned to B's quiet bungalow, the digital storm had already broken. The journalist had published her story the moment B gave her the signal. The headline was stark and damning. "Local veterans' home stolen in forgery scheme. Son and daughter-in-law implicated by camera footage." The article was a brutal, factual account, linking directly to the video and the fraudulent documents. It laid out the crime with the cold precision of a coroner's report. I sat on B's back porch, a thick wool blanket over my lap, and listened to the wind chimes. I didn't feel triumph, only a great, hollowed-out stillness. This wasn't revenge. It was exposure. It was turning on a light in a rotten room. The first tremor hit the next morning. A call from the county clerk's office confirmed an official fraud inquiry had been opened. The out-of-county notary's license was suspended pending investigation. By noon, Genevieve's carefully curated social media empire had begun to crumble. The comments on her latest post, a picture of her smiling in my kitchen, captioned "Celebrating family is everything," turned into a raging torrent of outrage. The boutique clean living brands she partnered with began issuing statements announcing they were reevaluating their relationship with her. By mid-afternoon, a senior partner from Julian's investment firm left a clipped voicemail for B. He had seen the article. Julian had apparently used my house as proof of assets to secure leverage for a commercial real estate deal. With the deed now in question, the entire deal was frozen. The doorbell rang late that afternoon. It was Clara standing on the welcome mat with her pink backpack and a crumpled note from Genevieve. "She needs to stay with you for a few days, until this calms down." Her eyes, wide and searching, met mine. "Did I do the right thing, Grandma?" she whispered. I knelt and pulled her into a hug, my heart aching with the weight of her courage. You did the bravest thing, sweetheart. That's what matters. That night, Julian finally called. His voice on the voicemail was a frayed rope, swinging wildly between anger and a desperate, pleading tone. He claimed I was being manipulated by B, that the video didn't tell the whole story, that I was destroying the family. He never apologized. He never once asked how my jaw was healing. I deleted the message without a second thought. Instead, I sat with Clara at the kitchen table and helped her with her spelling homework. We ate soup and watched a nature documentary about migrating birds. The sheer, breathtaking ordinariness of it felt like a miracle. The lies they had built with such confidence were collapsing under their own weight. They had constructed their world on the assumption of my silence, but they had misjudged the foundation. My silence wasn't weakness, it was bedrock, and they were the ones in the earthquake. The letter from Julian's attorney was an exercise in veiled threats, framed as a request for mediation. It was a desperate attempt to pull the conflict back behind closed doors, where they could control it. I handed it to B. "That means it's working," she said flatly. The pieces began to fall faster. The county fraud office declared the deed void. The notary confessed she'd been paid in cash by Julian and had never met me. Legally, the house had never left my name. Then came the call I had been bracing for. The guidance counselor from Clara's school. She had noticed changes in Clara for months: anxiety, withdrawal. My report, combined with the public evidence, was enough to trigger a formal wellness review. I would be filing for temporary guardianship. The fight was no longer just about a house. It was about a child. In the sterile quiet of the family courtroom, I faced my son. He wore a tailored suit and an expression of aggrieved innocence. He didn't look at me. Ashley wasn't there. His lawyer painted a picture of a family under stress, of misunderstandings. He spoke of healing. But the judge, a woman with eyes that had seen every kind of lie, was unmoved. When our evidence was presented, the video, the audio, the school counselor's report, a grim stillness settled over the room. The judge asked Julian one direct question: "What steps did you take to ensure your child's safety and well-being following the assault on her grandmother, which she partially witnessed?" He faltered, mumbling about therapy for Genevieve, about needing time. When the judge turned to me, I kept my statement brief. "Clara is safe with me. She sleeps through the night now. She draws pictures of our garden. I am not here to assign blame. I am here to protect her peace." The ruling was swift. Temporary guardianship granted to Ilara Vance. All parental visitation to be supervised. As we walked out into the bright, cold sunlight, Clara's small hand found mine. She didn't let go. The public fallout continued its slow, inexorable burn. Julian was quietly let go from his firm. Genevieve's last brand partnership dissolved. Their beautiful, curated life, built on a foundation of my silent suffering, had been exposed as a hollow facade. One evening, B showed me an article. A legal scholar was using my case as a teaching example in a course on elder protection law. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the precedent. It was about the next woman who might be told she was confused, frail, and alone. Fall arrived, painting the trees outside my window in shades of fire and gold. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the tense, waiting silence of before. Clara thrived. She made friends. She learned to ride her bike without training wheels. The haunted look in her eyes was replaced by the bright, curious spark of childhood. On a crisp November morning, a single envelope with no return address appeared in my mailbox. Inside, a note was written in a faint, spidery hand I hadn't seen in 30 years. "You did what I couldn't. "You got out. I'm proud of you." It was from my sister, who had vanished into a life of her own decades ago after a brutal marriage. We had both been survivors, fighting different wars in silence. That one sentence was a bridge across a lifetime of distance. The day the nonprofit group came to film my story, I sat in my own living room, sunlight streaming through the windows. I didn't speak of revenge. I spoke of the insidious nature of silence, of how abuse in old age often wears the disguise of care. I spoke of reclaiming not just a house, but a voice. When the video was released, the stories began pouring in from women across the country, a chorus of voices finally breaking their own silence. They were stories of financial manipulation, of emotional neglect, of being made to feel like a guest in their own lives. I never spoke to Julian again. There was nothing left to say. The end of their story was not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet dissolution. Their assets were divided, their partnership broken. Their power, which had seemed so absolute, had been a mirage. My own ending was not about victory. It was about the quiet joy of watching Clara race her scooter down the sidewalk. It was about the taste of tea on a cold morning. It was about knowing the locks on my doors were my own. It was the profound peace that comes from choosing to speak, and after everything, choosing to be kind. But this time, only on my own terms. The house was finally quiet, but my heart was not. It beat with a clear, steady, and certain rhythm. Some endings are written in court documents. Others are written in the laughter of a child who finally feels safe. Mine was written in both. And for the first time in a very long time, I was truly home.